everyone, and welcome back to the Hero Arts YouTube channel. This is Mindy Egan. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to use the new contour ink with Copic markers. The contour ink is a very light ink and is great for no line coloring. The contour ink is a smooth, lightened hybrid ink. It works with alcohol markers such as Copic markers, which I'll be using today. Also works with colored pencils and watercolors. And you can see it comes just like the Hero Arts pad. It is a felt pad. To do my coloring today, I'm going to use the Florals Lotus stamp set. This is a nice 3x4 stamp set. The reason I chose this image is because it has quite a bit of open space. There are quite a few petals, but you're going to see how it just magically transforms into this no line look. So I took the lily pad and the lotus flower and I lined it up on a piece of dove white cardstock, and I'm going to stamp this in the contour ink. The contour ink is very, very light, but what I like about these kind of inks is you're almost getting like 3 or 4 ink colors in one ink pad, depending how many times you stamp it. So I inked my image up and I'm stamping that down on the dove white cardstock, and I'm going to show you what it looks like stamping it multiple times. So here's the first time I stamped it. You can see it is very, very light, barely even see it. Now, some people are really good at coloring with this type of lightness. Unfortunately, I am not one of those people. So what I'm going to do is stamp this 2 more times. And even though I'm stamping it a couple times and it is darkening those lines, it's still going to give me a beautiful no line coloring effect. Most times we stamp in a black ink, which gives us those definition of the line and where to color in. But this is going to provide that no line look, and the lines are just going to fade away as we color. Now, before I begin, I want to show you how I'm going to be coloring. So I just have a piece of scratch paper here. I'm taking my Copic marker and I'm going to do some flicking. I do this technique a lot in this video today. So I lay down my color and I'm going to flick my tip up. So just really watch my hand movement here. You can see it's going to be thicker where my marker first laid down, and then it's going to get skinnier as I flicked away from my cardstock. I flick away. Some people bring it towards them, but I want to have kind of that skinny point towards the end. And I'm holding my marker straight up and down to get the finest point of that tip. So here are my 2 images on my cardstock. And what I like to do personally is turn my cardstock upside down. This is just how I prefer to color. You can leave it right side up if you prefer. And I'm going to choose one of the petals to start with. I have the colors listed at the top, and I'm starting with my darkest color, which is the BV08, and I'm adding just really tiny flicks to the very tip of the lotus flower. There are numerous ways to color a lotus flower. When I had Googled the image, I really fell in love with having the darkest color on the very tips. A lot of times with flowers, you see with the darker shade or the shadow area towards the center. But with a lotus flower, I feel like we have a lot more versatility because you can either have the darkest shades towards the inside or on the outside and make it look like it's glowing. So that's what I'm going to do today. So I started with BV08. I added those little flicks. I come in with BV04 and I continue down. Then I have BV13, and I'm going back over that that previous color I did, flicked out, and now I'm bringing in the BV02 right up to the line of the next petal. I left my first couple petals here in regular speed, so this is the real speed that I'm coloring in, and then I do speed up the video quite a bit. I left all the coloring in, and I'm going to talk you through some things that I found helpful when no line coloring. But you can see here I'm really taking my time, really adding those flicks. The flicks I'm making sure are uneven. I don't personally want them all the same length. I think it's more realistic of a flower to have different lengths of the flicks, and it's okay if they're not completely blended together. That's kind of the beauty of nature. And now you may look at this at first and not be able to see the full picture of what this flower is going to look like. You might be discouraged, but please, if you're trying this, just keep going. Once you finish coloring the entire image, it really is going to pull together. Now, one of the first things I want to share is do one petal at a time. If you're really new to this or even new to coloring in general, I work in one small section at a time. That it means my ink is still wet on my cardstock and it's easier for me to blend. And I also feel like I have a little bit more creative freedom when I'm no line coloring. I'm not confined by the black lines. Now, if at any point you get a little confused or you're not sure where your lines are or what that petal is supposed to be, bring your stamp set in. Have it off on the side as a reference or even stamp it out on black cardstock. That will really help show you where all the lines are or what petal is supposed to be where. It's just a really great guide to have on hand. Now, as I stated, I feel like there's a little bit more creative freedom and not confined by the black lines. And what I mean by that is if you go over the line a little bit, one of the great things about these no line coloring is you're not going to be able to see that line. So if you go outside of the area just a little bit, it's totally fine. You can just blend that into the rest of the petal. That petal might be just a little bit bigger than the rest, and that's totally okay. As this image is pulling together, you are not going to see the lines of this image anymore. Now, there are some petals where it's kind of overlapping, where they're starting to curl on itself, like this one, for instance. Now, you can define those lines if you want just a little bit, but if it's too small of an area, it is totally okay to just color over it. I did attempt to add little bits of shadow areas to those curled petals, but I didn't do it on all of them. If you really get down and compare it to the stamp set, I did kind of work it into my own coloring abilities. I don't no line color very often, so if it was just too small of an area for me, then I just didn't do it. Another thing you could do is once it is all done, if you wanted to enhance some of those areas, you could bring in a colored pencil, either a white one to add some more highlights, or if you wanted to grab a color similar to your darkest marker, and you could just kind of intensify those darker areas just a little bit. So as I'm finishing coloring up these last few petals, I really wanted to add more of a glowing effect to the lotus. I love the lotus flower, and I think it's just gorgeous when it's sitting there and it has, if you see some artwork, it looks like it's glowing from the inside. So what I'm going to do to try and replicate that is I'm taking an FY1. You can take any light yellow marker, and I'm adding just a couple small flicks right towards the inside of each petal. That just kind of, to me, gives more of a light glowing from the inside and just kind of more of a mystical look to the flower. After my lotus is done, I'm going to work on my lily pad. I just have one here. I'm keeping it pretty simple. And you can see the lily pad has a lot of the veins on it. I honestly struggled with it, so I'm going to ignore those veins. I have G29, G17, and YG06, YG00. I started with the darkest color in the very middle of the lily pad and notice that I am not coloring in that entire lily pad. I'm going to be placing my lotus on top of this, so I don't need to color that whole area because the lotus flower is going to be covering it. I'm also saying that the shadow would be towards the inside of the lily pad the most because that's where the lotus is going to be sitting. And then my lightest area towards the very outside edges. And even though I didn't go over the veins, I still think that these darker flicks of color kind of give that veiny look. So like I said, you really have some freedom here with coloring with no line. Don't let it intimidate you. Think of it as a way to explore your own abilities. Now I'm going to use the coordinating dies to die cut out these images. This would also be amazing if you were to have masked off your images and just did it right on a card to create a one layer card. So I'm going to add just a little bit of light interest to the background, and for that I'm using the script background stamp. I placed that in my MISTI tool and I removed the foam insert. I am taking a piece of Dove White cardstock. I put a little bit of a tape runner on the back, placed it over my background. I'm trying to line this up straight as best as I can, and then I'm going to close my MISTI backwards. So I'm bringing the back of the MISTI over to close it. That's going to secure that little bit of adhesive that I had placed on the back of the cardstock, and it's going to hold my cardstock in place on my MISTI. So I know with script backgrounds, it is kind of hard to line things up straight, and I'll show you how I work around that. But the contour ink I want to show you is great for just stamping in general and adding a little bit of interest to your backgrounds. Now I am going to stamp this a couple times because it is super light. So I'll stamp that one more time and just add that even pressure all over the background. And I did notice that my background is not straight. I did not line up my script very well. So to fix that, I am taking the nested rectangle infinity die and I'm lining that up straight over my background, and then I die cut that out into a smaller panel. I'm going to add this die cut panel to a piece of Meadow cardstock that's cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I'm lining the back of that with foam tape to add a little bit of dimension to the card. The rest of my card I'm keeping pretty simple, so by just adding dimension, just kind of makes me feel like I'm doing a little bit more to the card. Once I have that secured, I'm taking my lily pad and I'm adding tape runner to that and just gluing that straight down to the front of the card. I'm going to line the lotus up, line the back of it up with some foam tape to give that just a little bit of dimension. So after I remove all the backing of my foam tape, I'm going to place that over my lily pad, and you can see why I hadn't colored in that entire piece. For my sentiment for the front of the card, I die cut out the word thanks. This is from the Happy Thanks Stamp and Cut XL. I die cut it from holographic cardstock, and I cut strips of foam tape and added it behind all of the letters. I continued to use the same foam tape because then it all has the same dimension. So one half of it has the foam tape. The T and H just have a tape runner on it because it's going right on top of my lotus and it's going to overhang there a little bit. And that's going to finish off my card. Now, I know the no line coloring can be very intimidating, but trust me, just keep working with it, practice, give the image a chance to come together, and I promise you will love it in the end. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll see you again soon.